Before we start, I kindly thank UK Rob M for buying us a cuppa since the last video. It's always appreciated.
He took her down to the shed and gave her one. Then he gave her another one, and he kept giving her one. She'd never experienced any of this before. She enjoyed it so much she left her husband. Well, this book is just quite frankly very rude, and certainly not for you to listen to, kitten. Of course, I'm not really reading from The Fall of Western Man by Mark Collette. Now, over the past 70 years, there's been many controversial books. So what better opportunity than to look at some and find out why they were so bad. Why? Because it's an excuse to read rude and naughty passages from books throughout the years. Isn't that right, kitten? Exactly. He enjoys it, we all enjoy it. Everyone likes a good book, unless you can't read, in which case you just listen to an audiobook instead. Unless you can't read and you're deaf as well, in which case you're fucked.
First up, it's the Russian novel Lolita, about a man called Humbert Humbert, who really is, well, let's be honest, a paedophile. He moves to outback America, where he meets Lolita, also known as Dolores, a 12-year-old. To get close to her, he moves into the house and marries Charlotte, Lolita's mum. And unsurprisingly, Charlotte dies in a car crash, which means Humbert Humbert is now Lolita's legal guardian. They go on a road trip across America, staying at hotels, motels and holiday inns, as he's given her gifts and bribes to gain her affection, and that he does, and it all gets very mucky. Lolita is eventually rescued by a man called Claire, I know, even back then. But unfortunately, he's not really being rescued because he turns out to be just like Humbert, only even worse. Although Humbert does kill him and ends up in prison for killing him, not for being a nonce. But then Humbert dies in prison, and Lolita, well, she's married and pregnant with someone else, her own age.
So how can I help you? Go ahead, have a seat. I suggest you sit down.
Next up is The Colour Purple, the black people favourite about Kelly, a poor uneducated African American girl in the early 1900s. Although it starts off badly because she's repeatedly abused by her father and then has 2 children by him. So how does she help herself? Well, she writes letters to God. The film is mainly about racism and black people in America. On one note though, the author has declined for this book to ever be published in Israel because she's apparently anti-Semitic.
Gail, what did you say to Miss Millie?
I said, hell.
Next up is A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, about a dystopian future which is essentially communist. It was controversial for its sexual freedoms. So, children are conditioned from a young age to view sex as a casual activity devoid of love or intimacy, because one of the lines in the book is, everyone belongs to someone else. There's the drug use as well, or in the book, soma. Natural reproduction and family structures are replaced by technological birthing and state-controlled upbringing. And then there's the caste system as well, from the intelligent alphas to the menial epsilons. The lower the caste, the shorter the oxygen. Essentially, it was controversial everywhere, purely because it goes against God.
I'm Kieran Richardson, an actor on Hollyoaks, and I'm about to become a dad.
I quite like Fletcher for a boy.
My husband and I are expecting our twins to arrive at any moment.
Ulysses by James Joyce is mainly banned due to the sexual content, not because it's about the day in the life of Dubliners. There's his wife's affair, wanking, and other voyeuristic tendencies. And this is why it was banned in the UK amongst other places. T.S. Eliot, however, demanded that everyone get to read it. Says a lot about him.
Well, I'll tell you the book I've chosen as my favourite book, and it may make some people's hearts sink because it's a book that is associated with difficulty, whereas in fact it should be associated with joy. It's the novel Ulysses by James Joyce.
We then have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I think we know where this one's going. The N-word appears over 200 times in the book, reflecting how we spoke at the time and some of us speak today. Not us, of course, not in England. For example, Miss Watson's big name Jim was sitting in the kitchen door. We could see him pretty clear because there was a light behind him. Then there's Jim, the runaway slave. He was almost always right. He had an uncommon level head for a... Now while Jim is one of the most sympathetic characters in the novel, he also is depicted through, stereotypes. There are plenty of other examples in the book, however, you can go and find the 198 other ones yourself.
This is not a new controversy. It's come up many, many times in the past. You've had parent groups, you've had library associations, you've had education associations. They've all objected to the use of some of the language in there, and of course, the N-word right at the top of the list. Let's face it, this was written 125 years ago. It's an American classic. Mark Twain captured the spirit of the times in all of its warmth, beauty, and also brutality and vileness in terms of race and racism. Taking it out of the context of the times, I think, would be an absurdity. And I think racial and political correctness run amok.
Last of all, we have D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, about a woman so bored of her disabled husband, she goes and starts hanging around with groundskeeper Willie and playing with groundskeeper Willie's Willie. It was banned from 1928 until 1960, when it went to trial, an obscenity trial, and the jury found it not guilty. Why? Because despite the fact it had lots of four-letter words and very graphic descriptions of bedroom twister, the modern public didn't mind. I wonder why. I think we should look at some examples. Firstly, there's all the mucky talk, such as, he was a bit dazed himself, but he didn't care. He felt he was himself, and he was proud of himself and his penis. Well, who isn't? Then there was the swearing, which was very unheard of in 1928, such as, he said to her, in the strange passion, that he would fuck her to the very last gasp. She lay in his arms completely undone with a sense of his male beauty and his passion. She had never known him like this. It was as if she never wanted anything else in the world. But there's also the other naughty words, the C word. Her warm cunt seemed to suck at his penis with a grasping life of its own. But moving on quickly, what about the books that were fine back then, but in retrospect might seem a bit problematic? As some people say, we don't think they're problematic, we just find them funny. Now last year, Agatha Christie's books were given the going over to get rid of any potentially offensive language. Not the kind of language you just heard in D.H. Lawrence's books. No, it's nothing mucky, just descriptions of different races and people. Imagine that. So let's go to one of the places where she wrote her books to see just how bad they were. Now in the 1920 novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, Agatha Christie made the very bad decision of being anti-Semitic, because one character, Mr. Alfred Inglethorpe, is described in very anti-Semitic ways, such as, he was an odd-looking man with a great black beard and a hooked nose, decidedly Jewish in type. Naughty Agatha. In the 1925 novel, The Secret of Chimneys, she used words to describe Africans, with plenty of use of the N-word, which I won't be saying. She also described them as savages or primitive. In one part of the book where someone has done something bad, one of the characters says, it was one of those N-words, I suppose. How very presumptuous, isn't it? In the 1926 novel, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, she's back to her anti-Semitic ways. For instance, Mr. Ackroyd describes Mr. Deacon, a character associated with shady dealings, in a way it describes a negative trait. He looked like a Hebrew moneylender. It also showed local villagers being very distrustful of people from the outside and they shouldn't be there. Well, imagine that. 1937 novel, Death on the Nile, is very derogatory of Egyptians with such lines as, they're all the same, these people, they've no sense of responsibility or moral feeling. Plus, they're a lazy lot, these Egyptians, they need a firm hand to keep them in order. How very colonial. In 1964, with A Caribbean Mystery, she still hadn't learnt her ways. So you can imagine what a Caribbean mystery is just like. Everyone's depicted as simple-minded, lazy, or just easily led, or childlike and simple. Then there's the case of the 1939 novel, And Then There Were None. However, when it came out, it wasn't called that, it had been changed, because previous to it being called And Then There Were None, it was called 10 Little Indians, and prior to that, it was called this. I shan't be reading that one out. Unsurprisingly, it's no longer called that, so if you go into the Waterstones and ask for it, you'll get nicked. I'd highly recommend you get down to some charity bookshop and buy the original copies. That old woman didn't sit in this building here for nothing. She wants you to read her original works, not the ones they want you to read now, with all the accurate descriptions of people from abroad. Until next time, ta-ta for now.
But of course, if the intruder had broken in, the glass would be on the inside of the floor.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's quite all right. My ability to solve crimes is celebrated around the world.
Right. Can I just ask, are you actually a member of the police force?
No.
Oh, fuck off then!
The fucking Robin was a giant fucking much
If you enjoyed this video or thought it's slightly less shit than the others, you can always buy us a cuppa on Ko-fi. The link is in the description below, and thank you in advance if you do.